The first time I entered the welfare system, I didn't feel like I was entering anything. I felt like I was doing the sensible thing. At the time, it just looked practical, straightforward, even helpful. It didn't feel ideological. It didn't feel dramatic. It felt rational. Before I continue, a brief introduction. What you're watching is not live footage. This is a digital stand-in for me, generated to look and sound like me, and used to speak from my perspective. This channel explores things I find worth thinking about: disability, systems, psychology, finance, and how people actually live inside structures that shape them. The format is practical. I live with a physical disability that makes recording unpredictable. Some days filming is simple, other days it isn't possible. Using a digital version of myself allows continuity. The aim isn't performance, it's clarity and consistency. If this kind of thinking is useful to you, you're welcome to follow along. When I finished my GCSEs, school effectively ended at 16. That was normal at the time. I happened to be 15 when I finished because of my birthday falling later in the year, but academically, I had completed what school required. So I was in that in-between space. Not in school anymore, not really employed, not quite an adult. I had already been diagnosed with a degenerative neurological condition. I could still walk then, but poorly. I looked unsteady most of the time. I was tired more often than people around me, and coordination wasn't great. I went to the job centre because that seemed like the next step. You leave school, you look for work. Very quickly, the tone shifted. I was told that, given my condition, I didn't need to look for work at all. I had to apply for benefits instead. It wasn't said aggressively. It wasn't unkind. It was framed as support. You're eligible, and that word matters. Eligible. At 15 or 16, when you're tired and unsure what you're capable of, eligibility feels like relief. It feels like someone acknowledging reality. There was no discussion about long-term trajectory. There was no discussion about building skills around limitation. There was a form. I filled it out. That's how entry happens. Not through a speech, through paperwork. What I didn't understand then was how incentives begin shaping behaviour almost immediately. Starter wages for young people are low. Entry-level jobs are physically demanding. Long hours, little pay. Benefits at that stage weren't high, but they were comparable. Sometimes slightly higher than what I would have earned working full-time at the very bottom of the wage scale. So from a purely rational perspective, the calculation was obvious. Why exhaust myself in a job that paid less when I was eligible for support? It didn't feel like avoidance, it felt sensible. And once you're inside that system, there's more to do than people assume. Forms, medical evidence, assessments, renewals. You learn how to describe your body in certain terms. You learn what counts as limitation. You learn which phrases fit eligibility criteria. That administrative work becomes its own occupation. It fills space, and while you're filling forms and attending assessments, you're not building skills elsewhere. You're not experimenting with work in the same way your peers are. You're not chasing things you might actually want to become good at. It's not that motivation disappears. It narrows. Support begins to replace development. And at that age, I didn't experience it as dependency. I experienced it as logic. Given my body, given the pay structures, given the fatigue, this seemed like the rational path. That's how it began, not dramatically, just administratively, and something else shifted over time. It wasn't just financial dependence, it was broader than that. when your housing, your care, your medical support, your mobility, and sometimes your basic dignity depend on systems you don't control. Your nervous system adapts. That isn't drama, it's regulation. I began noticing a pattern in how I interacted with people. Not just officials, not just assessors. With many people, I would soften myself, lower my tone, reduce confrontation, sometimes make myself slightly smaller than I actually was. At the time, I thought that was personality, and sometimes it is. Being polite is often intelligent. It can smooth situations. It can help you navigate difficulty. So this isn't a confession of weakness, but looking back, I can see that the softness intensified alongside structural dependence. Many disabled people recognize this when they reflect honestly, a kind of adaptive agreeableness, not manipulation, not a strategy, just constant calibration towards safety. When you have reduced leverage, you signal non-threat. That's human. The short-term effect can feel positive. Smoother conversations, less friction. But the long-term cost is cumulative. If you repeatedly minimize urgency, repeatedly signal that you will cope, repeatedly avoid escalation, systems adjust their response accordingly. Needs get recorded as manageable. Concerns get described as moderate. Support is calibrated downward. Over time, that compounds. Now widen the lens. When dealing with councils and other public bodies, this dynamic is not rare. Some professionals are conscientious, some are careful, but many operate inside structures where doing the minimum required work carries little immediate consequence. Large caseloads, protected employment, budget pressure, performance systems focused on closure rather than depth. If a compliant client does not escalate, does not formally challenge, does not push, it is easier to move the file along, easier to underexplore complexity, easier to record stability where there is strain. That may not feel dramatic from the desk, but from the other side of the desk, the impact is significant. And this is where the funding question becomes uncomfortable. Most taxpayers assume that disability funding translates fairly directly into support for disabled people. In reality, a substantial portion sustains the machinery. Assessment teams, case management layers, panels, oversight structures, compliance systems, salaries are paid reliably, processes are maintained, files are reviewed. All of that may be administratively necessary. But when the machinery becomes thick enough that it absorbs large amounts of resource, while the individual still struggles for basic, practical support, something has inverted. The person in need becomes secondary to the process managing them. And that inversion is not neutral. It has consequences. For the worker, it is one file among many. For the disabled person, it is their entire life. That asymmetry should matter. When I look back at 15, I don't see drama. I see a young person entering a structure that would quietly shape how he spoke, how he pushed back, and how much he expected. It felt sensible at the time. It rarely feels dramatic when it begins. It only becomes clear in retrospect. And that is where we'll continue next time.